Brilliant. Well, the sun's out today, so I'll try and hurry up since I'm the last one going and get us back out into the sun. But as Chris introduced me, I'm Mark Jones. I'm a senior energy engineer at Cotopaxi, and I'm going to be talking around the road to net zero and how data collection supports that drive. Clicker works. So just a brief overview of Cotopaxi and what we do. So we've been operating since 2009, where our now managing director, Cliff Bradshaw, started the company. We've got clients across 70 countries, a group of chartered energy consultants, engineers and IT specialists. So what we try and do is bring data onto our platform Strata, which is a cloud-based utility monitoring system, which has been deployed in over 70 countries, is available in over 30 languages, and there's over 3,000 implementations of it worldwide. As part of that, we then bring the data onto Strata, and our engineering team in-house utilise and analyse the data that's given there to support clients to get to their net zero goals by optimising their energy consumption and also by looking towards green technologies and getting them to their net zero goals. So climate change is what we need to first look at before we get into net zero and why we're actually trying to achieve that. So just a brief overview of climate change. I'm sure everyone at some point or another has seen a slide similar to this, where there's a scary graph with temperature increasing dramatically and why we need to then stop that from increasing further. If you look at the numbers, you're about 0.88 degrees Celsius increase from when the baseline was set, which doesn't seem like a lot. And being from Scotland and you see the sun outside, you can be forgiven for thinking it's a great thing. But when you look at the idea that at 1.5 degrees Celsius, you're almost at the point of no return, that's quite close that we've got to that, and we really need to be looking at how we can stop getting past that point of no return where we're in big trouble, essentially. So all the current models that we've got look at as being, between 2.5, 4 degrees by the end of the century, and it's industry's job and government's job as well through legislation to support us in combating against that process. So climate change affects everything from the weather, which is the classic example, from tornadoes and snowstorms and all that kind of stuff, to healthcare, food supply, housing throughout the world, rising sea levels, all that kind of stuff. So regulations starting to come in. You've got things that you hear all the time, like the Paris Agreement, net zero target in the UK by 2050. As part of that, industry's kind of brought into that, and then they've started to set their own goals around that when they're going to hit net zero. And further regulation's going to come, which is ultimately going to mean that your business is going to have to comply with this process. The earlier head start you get on this, the better equipped you'll be to get to net zero. So net zero, what, why and how, a brief description on the screen there of what net zero is, but really the reason is why we're doing it. So I touched on the climate benefits and the real driving force for why the world is wanting to do it, but from an industry point of view, there's a number of different reasons why you, as someone in the industry sector, would want to do this. Those are being cost savings, environmental compliance, enhanced brand value. So when you're trying to sell your goods or services, it's really important that you've got a good environmental strategy. And as younger people come into the marketplace, that's really what they're looking for, both even in looking for employers, looking for buying services and goods. There's reduced business risk because you're not going to further down the line get caught by all these regulations that will come in later. And then you improve your CapEx deployment by getting ahead of the game rather than having to put in millions and millions of pounds at the very end of it. You can start to make that journey begin just now. So how do you do it? Well, it's a long process, but if we cut them down into kind of three main stages, what we need to do is the metering, monitoring and targeting part of it, which is where we get the data, bring that back into a system that allows us to analyse that, to benchmark that against best performance, to look at KPIs that will then support you to drive down your energy consumption, optimise those existing systems that are on site and try to reduce your current energy consumption down to as low as possible or as best practice as we can, and then look at trying to implement zero carbon energy systems. If you jump to the last stage and just put a load of money in to buy solar or other different environmental zero carbon energies, then you'll end up spending a fortune compared to what you actually have to if we go through this process correctly. So looking at the kind of journey to net zero, this is a slide that's kind of how Cotopaxi deal with the system and how we go through this process. The process is very similar between different companies that do it, depending on how many stages they want to split it out into. But if we look at stage one, which is the metering, monitoring and targeting piece, what we want to do is identify areas of the factory, areas of industry where we can really drive down into the data and optimize your process, see, benchmark your KPIs, look at your base loads, look at what production's doing. Maybe if you run shift patterns, how does that operate during the weekend, at night, that kind of idea. Then we want to take that data and optimize the existing systems using engineering best practice, understand how a system should be operating, where the current system is operating, and then try and bring it into that best practice zone where we're then minimizing the energy consumption that you're utilizing. Then once we're confident that we're at a level where the system is as optimal as we're likely to get it without spending hundreds of years looking at it and hundreds of pounds to optimize it, we can then look at how green energy systems can integrate with your current process and what ones are most applicable to you, what fuel mixes are available in your kind of area, what fuel mixes are most suitable for your processes and equipment. So looking at stage one, what we kind of go through is completing full energy assessments of your existing utility systems and processes, looking at completing utility line diagrams for your electricity, your water, your gas, compressed air, looking at where that's being used in the factory, where the high users are, where the key areas are for waste or energy recovery that we can get or optimization that we can get, and then putting a system in place that allows us to get data from that and be able to utilize that to drive down your energy reduction. So it's all about where we're putting these meters, utilising the CapEx as best we can to get the most data out of the system to allow us to drive down or to increase your performance in terms of your KPIs. So from that data, you then need to look at governance, KPIs, benchmarking against best practice, and then use that as a tool to then drive down your energy consumption and ultimately reduce your cost spend. And the overall take to come from this is you can't manage what you don't measure. So I've been at the other side of it in industry where we have very little idea of what we were actually using at all of our plants and different processes. It's very difficult to then go from that stage to say, okay, I don't really know what's happening here, but I'm going to now create a net zero plan that gets me to be net zero by 2030. You need to go through these processes, understand your data and where that's being consumed, what it's being consumed on, how that's functioning before you can then say, okay, I'm going to be net zero by 2030 because the marketing team says that we should be. So from that, we then get into looking at the data, setting our KPIs and performance reviews. These are just some snippets from our Strata platform, but you get the idea of looking at the data, understanding where you're currently using all your data, using all your energy rather, and then trying to optimize that solution. And then just a simple example here, we've got a compressor that we've monitored the energy from, and we can see that the way this factory operates is they close at the weekend, but actually they run their compressor all the way through the weekend. You speak to someone on site, they'll definitely say, oh yeah, that compressor's off at the weekend. But we know countless times over that when we go and we actually monitor these systems, the reality is that when the maintenance engineer's running home at the end of the week, that's the first thing he forgets. So we're improving the understanding of how the machinery is controlled in the factory. This is a pretty simple example, but you can scale this up to look at full steam systems, boiler systems, the whole compressed air system, look at leakage rates, all of that kind of stuff. And we've improved our understanding of load profiles and the baseline consumption of the site. By having the data, we then also allow ourselves to validate any improvements that we make, so any projects that we identify and opportunities that we want to implement, we can use this data to then say, look, we've went from where we are now, spending 40 kilowatts over the weekend, to 0. Stage 2 is to optimize existing systems. So that's looking at what's on your factory at the moment, looking at your boiler house, your refrigeration system, your compressed air system, looking at, for the boiler house, for example, is there any opportunities for heat recovery? How much condensate are we returning to the boiler house? Can we optimize that to ultimately drive down how much natural gas or electricity or water we're consuming at the factory over an annual basis? It's also important to understand here what the loads are, whether they are constant demand loads, whether they're cyclical loads, and how that would then translate into recovering heat or implementing green technologies on top of that, because some green technologies will suit better a solid load compared to cyclical demands. So we go through this process looking at all the different ways that we can optimize the existing systems. This is a list of some of the stuff that we look at, going off kind of low cost, no cost, which is your easy to get, low-hanging fruit, let's say, in terms of optimization, through to kind of standard investment solutions, which is looking at best practice and implementing engineering solutions to drive down your energy consumption. So what we go from is we have a baseline at the start where we, in this example, are about 8,000 tonnes, is that? And then we can drive that down to our new baseline, which around here is about 5,000. So if you had jumped in at the start of this process, not looked at the data, just looked at your utility bill and went, okay, I've got 8,000 tonnes of CO2 that I need to get rid of, I'm going to implement green technology straight away, you'd have spent a hell of a lot more than if you just went through this process and understand, how am I actually using this energy? Can I optimize those processes? Then where am I at? So this is just an example, but you could go lower than that, you could go less than that, but it's important to go through this process so that you as a company and as an organisation don't waste money by jumping in head first into the green renewables sector. And then we go into the final stage, which is the implementing low or zero carbon technologies and energy systems, looking at how your load profile is across the factory, what processes you have on the factory, how those interact with each other, and designing systems around implementing these green technologies to basically decarbonise your energy load. So there's a number of different technologies out there. Each of them have their flaws and their good points. It's all about finding a balance between different technologies that will allow you both to expand in the future and also change production from product A that uses 80% heat load in the factory to product B that's only a small percentage heat load in the factory, and how your green technologies will allow you to change between those different opportunities and production runs. So at Cotopaxi, we do what we call a sustainability master plan, which is we look at each of these individual technologies, how they're available in the country or area that you operate. We look at what other renewable energy sources are available, hydrogen, biomass, and others, and we try to build different options that allow you to run your factory as you want to, but with utilising green technologies. So once we put together how different technologies will support you, once you've done all your optimization and we know what your real baseload is for the factory, we can then use these green technologies to then drive your journey to net zero. And here's just an example of a waterfall chart of where you go from your current carbon emissions down to your final net zero goal, if you like, and the different steps that we can use to get there. And using our modelling tools, we can then model how different technologies would interact with that, what would give you big benefits, what would give you smaller benefits, but are required because a certain part of the process requires that kind of technology. And then ultimately going through the 3 stages, this is kind of what happens. a bit of a dramatic example, going from, you know, a high kilowatt, over 800 kilowatt base load down to 200. A bit extreme example, but you get the idea of how you can then optimize your system down, and rather than having to put in 800 plus kilowatts of green technologies, you've currently only got to put in 200 here. So you're reducing the overall capex that you've got to deploy at your site for green technologies, but you're getting to your net zero goal, which is the aim. So just to give a quick recap, the 3 stages that we want to go through, it's really important to understand how your plant operates, and that's through hourly data, you know, down to minute data, looking at hourly loads, daily loads, weekly loads, rather than just looking at your monthly invoices that come in. Then putting a team in place together with third-party support that will then allow you to drive and optimise and have governance over your energy consumption and your utility usage. Once you've done that, we need to be looking at how we optimise those existing systems using best practice, and then go in to implement zero carbon energy systems. So there's a whole raft of those zero carbon energy systems available, and it's all about picking what's best for you and your business. So that's a brief run through of the Cotopaxi process, what we do when we look at the road to net zero, why data is so important to drive those decisions that we make, because without the data, we jump straight in and we make mistakes, which always happens. So that's the kind of process that we go through. Does anyone have any questions on that?